The computer of the future will be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It'll recognize speech. It just might not do Windows. You can't really say that Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whatever need billions and billions of dollars to motivate them to go to the office and pursue the expansion of Google. That's wrong on its surface. Money in capitalism doesn't go to people who spend it best. It goes to people who can expand it best. The biggest industry in the world is not food or transportation or housing. The biggest industry in the world is currency trading, because governments have persuaded themselves that one of their greatest powers is just to print money. And if governments can print money, money really doesn't mean anything. Blockchain is sometimes called a unity. It's a single technology that addresses a set of serious global crises. Two most serious ones, I think, is the collapse of internet security. The other great hacking scandal in the world is the scandal of money. Money has to reveal prices, not set prices.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is George Gilder is one of the smartest men I have ever met. For the past 4 decades, he's been talking about economics, political policy. He wrote speeches for President Nixon, and Ronald Reagan quoted his book, Wealth and Poverty, more than any single source. And now he's back with a brand new book called Life After Google that's talking about the future, talking about 5G, the singularity, and more importantly, cryptocurrency and what it means for all of us. I'm telling you, sitting down with George was like being in a time machine and really accessing so much information and just a wealth of knowledge. And I know you're going to enjoy this incredible episode with George Gilder. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is George Gilder, the American investor, writer, economist, and techno-utopian advocate. For the past 4 decades, you've written extensively about technology's key creative role in economic growth and prosperity. Your 1981 best-selling book, Wealth and Poverty, was the most quoted book by Ronald Reagan and defined the economic revolution of his presidency. You're a Forbes magazine contributing editor, and you've written for The Economist, the Harvard Business Review, and the Wall Street Journal. Your latest book, Life After Google, describes a future internet armed with a unique cryptocurrency transaction layer that will provide a new standard for global money. George, welcome to London Real.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. First of all, before we get started, I just wanted to let people know we just finished recording a separate video that's not going to be on YouTube, that's all about the internet reboot and some very special investment situations in the 5G space and others. People can click the link below or go to londonreal.tv/reboot to get that free report. I highly recommend that people do that because you have some very interesting takes on some of these companies and technologies. You know, before we get started, George, I wanted to ask you about London. What does this city mean to you? What's it like when you come here? Do you remember the first time you came here? And how's it different than the States?
Well, I love London. I Isaac Newton was the master of the mint in London, and lots of people focus on his transformation of physics. But I think his greatest contribution historically was the gold standard. Isaac Newton engineered the gold standard, and most histories of Newton also pretend that the end of his life was sort of wasted, that he spent it doing alchemy. But what he was doing was trying to hack gold. He thought if gold could be demonstrated to be unhackable, then it could be the foundation for a global money, and it could underlie the British Empire. And so what most people thought was a waste of time by Newton was actually critical to 200 years of the greatest prosperity in the history of the human race. And not only did he provide the physics that underlaid the Industrial Revolution, he also provided the monetary structure. And I think today we're in a similar Newtonian moment where blockchain can not only provide the basis for a secure internet for the first time, but also the basis for unhackable money around the world. Now we have a double hacking crisis. The internet's hacked billions of times. And money is being hacked constantly by central bankers around the world. And so I think I'm glad to be in London for a new Newtonian moment.
I love it. And I've seen where he's buried in Westminster Abbey. And I never thought of him as kind of an economist as well. Yeah. But it's great that you say that. And maybe we can get back to the gold standard at some point. Yeah. Just to give people some context, if they don't know already, and I'm sure you've heard this quote, but I'm going to have to say it again. But in your book, Life After Television, which was published over 25 years ago, you said this.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
The computer of the future will be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It'll recognize speech. It'll navigate streets. It will collect your news and your mail. It just might not do Windows, Microsoft Windows, but it'll do doors, open doors to your future. And Steve Jobs took this book and distributed it to his colleagues, I learned recently. And Ari Emanuel read it. And this results in the current Vanity Fair calls me the original gangster futurist of Hollywood, who inspired Ari Emanuel to become the world super agent. So I'm that Life After Television was an important book, and Life After Google, I hope, will be equally important.
That's incredible. And the more I learn about you, the more I'm kind of blown away with how your mind works to see these things. How do you see something like that way before it even happens?
Because I studied the microchip. I mean, it was really an insight that came from my decision after writing Wealth and Poverty. It sold millions of copies around the world. It was the #1 book in France for 6 months. It was really a global bestseller. And it captivated the Reagan cabinet and Ronald Reagan himself. And I thought I'd done it. So I'd done economics, and now I was going to do technology. And I decided that the most important event in the world was the creation of the integrated circuit. It just seemed to me that the transformation of technology from being pushing and pulling materials from the outside, like applying forces to material entities from the outside, had given way to the internal manipulation of matter. And that this opened horizons of new technology that were really unlimited. And the microchip summed it up. And so I wrote a book about the microchip. And once you really understood the microchip, you could see that it's it had really no obvious limits, and that it would transform all technologies. And certainly anything that could be created in a giant computer could also be created in a handheld device or a watch-sized device. And so that was the source of that particular prediction. But I have had intuitions. I just don't know the real source of them. I mean, I wrote a book called Sexual Suicide in 1970-something, and predicted that the real crisis of the world would be depopulation rather than overpopulation. And that's probably my best prophecy ever. I mean, nobody expected it.
And it's happening
everybody
now.
Was predicting, a population bomb, a disaster of overpopulation. But the fact is, the real threat to the human race is depopulation resulting from sexual suicide. So this was really a pretty good call back in the 1960s and 70s. And today I'm doing time prices, which really transform economics. And I'm really excited with the discovery that money is time. And maybe I could use some water.
Yeah, there's some right there, exactly. Yeah. And so from what I understand from your that time theory is you don't look at prices in terms of money, but you use it in the amount of time we sacrifice in order to acquire those goods.
That's right.
So it's a completely different perspective.
The real price, the true price of anything is the number of hours of work you have to expend to buy it. Okay. And that measure obviates all the complexities of economic analysis summed up in consumer price indices, GDP deflators, purchasing power parities, all the ways that economists try to guess how different currencies relate to one another are transcended by the simple measure of how many hours you have to spend in order to acquire the money to buy anything. And this is hours, minutes, seconds, a universal measuring stick which can be applied to all problems of valuation. And this is, these are the true prices, as William Nordhaus sort of half got this idea. He really got the idea, and calls time prices the true prices, but then he didn't quite understand the full implications of it.
Based on that framework, how can you look at the economy today versus one of, say, 20 years ago? How are we doing on that?
We're doing fabulously better than than economists believe. Economists are all they're plunged deep into the dismal science again, and they think we're running out of stuff, and they think the climate is collapsing. They think that economies are stagnating, that innovation is slowing, all these beliefs, that interest rates are zero or below. All these beliefs are disproven by the use of true prices, which is essentially calculated by the nominal GDP, whatever it consists of, and the nominal average wage. You divide one into the other and you get a time price in hours and minutes and seconds, and they define the real values in the economy. And time prices show that we're in an era of tremendous technological and economic growth and prosperity. Wow. We have psychological problems, we have philosophical problems, we have terrible political perplexities, but economic growth is in a great boom, measured by the fact that the average worker every year has to spend less and less time to buy the goods and services that sustain his life. And thus he's released into doing all sorts of new inventive pursuits and opportunities. And I came from China a while back. I've been in China a lot because Life After Google was named the best social science book in China and a bestseller there, so I've been over there.
Doing the tour.
And
Cool.
everybody believes that the Chinese communists have been exaggerating the rate of economic growth in China. But when you estimate it by time prices, the amount of time an average Chinese has to spend to buy anything, Chinese growth has been drastically faster than the communist government claims. And China has been really an economic miracle, unprecedented, ever since its free zone strategy was adopted by Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s.
Okay, well, let's get into the book because there's fascinating stuff here, and you go pretty deep and pretty hard in on Google. I guess you're not going to be invited for Google Talks anytime soon.
Well, I keep getting told I'm going to be invited to Google Talks.
They might actually,
but they haven't done it. Okay. They won't do it.
Well, people are going to find out why soon.
Ray Kurzweil did, however.
He invited you.
No, Ray Kurzweil. I invited Ray to speak to my conference, and he gave a wonderful speech at my conference, COSM. In Seattle. But anyway.
All right. So anyways, and by the way, if anyone's coming in a little bit later, if they want to go ahead and look at this free investment report called Internet Reboots that we've talked about with your picks on the 5G technology stocks and some other things, they can click on the link below or go to londonreal.tv/reboot because you have some fascinating ideas when it comes to the investment. Talk about life after Google. You call it Silicon Valley's nervous breakdown, and you say that Google is not just a company, it's a system of the world. I think most people would agree it's ubiquitous, but they wouldn't see it the same way you do, George. How can you explain what the premise is of this?
Well, Google, I call it Google Marxism. And when you think about it, what was the real mistake Marx made, the profound error of Marxism? It was to believe that the Industrial Revolution was a kind of final human achievement, that after the Industrial Revolution, the problem of abundance had been solved, and production was consummated, and the only issue politically was how to distribute the existing abundance. And in other words, he believed that the Industrial Revolution, all those looms and factories and railroads and all the inventions of that era were kind of a final thing, an eschaton. Google's making the same error, that Silicon Valley is devoted to a similar Marxist mistake. It believes that machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotics, search engines, all biotech, all these breakthroughs of this era are kind of a final thing. And they're going to create machines that usurp human minds and transcend human minds, and all of us are going to be able to retire to tropical beaches while Brin and Page and the Google people fly off with Elon Musk to nearby planets, and machine learning and artificial intelligence inseminates the universe with ever more powerful machines that leave human beings far behind. And I think this is a delusional belief. And it actually has consequences. It results in real errors of policy and errors of business strategy.
Is this because there's a big echo chamber in the valley where people start to, you know, drink their own Kool-Aid and believe they are the masters of the universe and create their own destiny and drag us all along for the ride? Is that what's happening there?
I think it is a kind of delusional religion. I think it really derives from the sort of bottom-up theory that human beings are merely figments of evolution, of the product of a purely random and meaningless process, and that engineers can reproduce far better minds than this random process that's believed to be the source of human capabilities. And so they imagine they can design a better mind. And I've been, I just think this is a delusional belief, and it results in a whole industry focusing on replacing human beings rather than enhancing human beings. And I think that's a losing strategy. Human beings got to support this Silicon Valley venture. And if it's not enhancing their capabilities and expanding their opportunities and improving their lives, they aren't going to support it. And it's not going to work, because the fact is the human mind is the paramount manifestation of intelligence in the universe, and AI is just a machine that scarcely competes at all.
All right, and you're not impressed with the possibilities of that technology?
No, I am impressed with the possibilities of artificial intelligence, but it's just another step in the computer revolution that we've experienced for decades. And it's achieved tremendous breakthroughs. I mean, artificial intelligence algorithms can now determine protein folds, which are a crucial process in biology, far more effectively than unaided researchers can determine protein folds. Every DNA programs proteins. It assembles 23 amino acids into a variety of proteins. But DNA does not self-evidently show how to fold these proteins in all sorts of intricate shapes. And this has been a big obstacle to success in biotech. And this is an important breakthrough. AlphaFold came from Google, and it's a tremendous achievement, and I'm not denying it. But there's no intelligence in the way we conceive of intelligence in the human mind. The human mind is unique, and this is a machine. A machine is deterministic. Human intelligence manifests itself by unexpected ideas, by the capacity of imagination to conceive of counterfactuals or errors or new propositions that have never been entertained and don't spring from in any sort of predictable way from previous propositions. This is in information theory called entropy. It's unexpected bits, and all information is defined as unexpected bits. If a machine starts doing unexpected things, it's probably broken.
Right. So by definition, it will never have the creativity of a human.
Yeah.
And so by thinking that that is a future possibility, we're making a fatal flaw.
Yeah.
And this company is so ubiquitous in our lives that going down that path can be dangerous to us,
Yeah.
is what you're saying.
Yeah. Good summary.
What else about Google do we not see it? Like ways that it's in our lives that we don't recognize are potentially dangerous? Is it the big data? Is it the technology that goes with it? Is it the money? What is it?
You know, I really don't worry about Google.
Okay.
I mean, what I worry about today is this sort of mindless attack on Google that the Federal Trade Commission regards Google as a potential monopoly and is hobbling their prospects. And the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission doesn't like that Google is a meritocracy. They want it to follow all the rules of affirmative action. It doesn't like it that Google only hires the best computer scientists. And so the government and the culture are really attacking these great achievements, and which are just like the previous accomplishments of computer science, and summed up by IBM, for example. IBM was a giant that was attacked by the government as a potential monopoly. And
same with Microsoft.
What?
Same with Microsoft.
And Microsoft. They attack all these companies when they get big, and they're vulnerable when they're big, and the attacks just make them less effective, and almost always penalize their competitors more than their own potential. In other words, when the government enters a field with lawyers and bureaucrats and regulators, it makes that field less open and less full of opportunity for small companies and companies that might challenge Google. So Google now has come out against face recognition. Now Google's got face recognition beat. It accomplished face recognition pretty well some time ago, and face recognition is an important, vital technology. But Google's got it. So if it calls on all sorts of investigation and regulation of face recognition, who's going to be hurt? Google won't be hurt. All other companies that might challenge Google or develop better forms of face recognition or apply face recognition more inventively, they're the ones that will be suppressed by having new government regulation of a critical new human possibility.
Okay, so be careful when you go after these companies, because you might actually cut out the competitors.
Yeah, that's what you do.
That's what you
do. It's such a lesson of history. Many academics have noticed it, that the big established companies all kind of like regulation. They all kind of absorb the government into their business plans and use these rules as defenses against competition, as barriers to entry for opponents or rivals.
Now, also, a lot of things that Google offers you are free. How do you feel about free, and what should we be wary about when it comes to free?
Well, it's Google's strategy is aggregate and advertise. You assemble ever more customers, and then you advertise to them on the basis of data you collect from them through your search engines and other devices. And when you think of it, these ads, so-called, that Google is the master of propagating, aren't ads really, they're minuses. nobody wants to see them most of the time. They actually are value subtracted advertising. And so I worry about a business strategy that's based on giving people what they don't want. And this is particularly acute with mobile ads. Mobile ads, pop-up ads on your smartphone take some 30% of the bandwidth and 30% of your costs of your bandwidth subscription is just to accommodate ads, and they slow down everything else, and they actually impair the functioning of your device. So I think Google faces a real challenge you know, the statistics are just amazing. You can only, I think it's 0.4% of ads are actually clicked. And of this 0.4%, half of them are clicked by mistake. And so the actual click-through rate is some tiny portion of the total volume of ads that's delivered. And so it's really a fiasco, and it fails the test that I expounded in Life After Television, before Life After Google, that in this future internet era, where the advertisers would be so well informed about just what you need and what you want, you'd never have to see any advertisements you didn't want to see anymore. And that is being thwarted, not just by Google's strategy, but also by this misunderstanding of what privacy is that's prevalent everywhere. Everybody thinks that privacy has something to do with anonymity. Privacy has to do with identity, and what we need is to have an internet with secure identities that have to be respected, not an internet that allows anonymity, which means an internet that fills up with clutter and criminality.
And what about free services like free email and free videos on YouTube, which is where we're being watched right now? Yeah. Well, what is the danger of getting free services and having these things that don't cost money?
Well, it just means that the vendors of these services don't have any real customers. It's all this feed the horses to feed the flowers, you know, or to, you know, it's all these circuitous ways to avoid having real customers to whom you owe something, and including a secure connection, and from whom you are constantly learning how to satisfy their needs better. So I think it's free goods are really, it's a deception. They've caused a lot of resentment, actually, because they place a focus on this collection of information, which is ordinarily perfectly acceptable, but which, when it's combined with free goods and lots of advertising that you don't want to see, it seems somehow a scandal. And but I think I'm for micropayments, I'm for ways of collecting money from particular customers. And I'm spending a lot of time in China, I noticed that the big China internet companies only get 10 to 15% of their revenues from advertising, while Google and Facebook get 90% and more of their revenues from advertising. And I think the American model is deeply vulnerable, and the idea that these American companies can be harassed and fined and litigated and sued constantly and subjected to these Byzantine privacy rules, such as the new California law that really defends the big companies, because small companies really have tremendous problems complying with the mass of specific and complex regulations. And yeah, they exempt some small companies, but in the end, if you are going to challenge the incumbents, you got to get sort of big. And as soon as you get big, you face this sudden onset of thousands of regulations, which are all based on technologies that are past, or political prejudices or misconceptions, and it's destructive.
Yeah, like you said, when something's free, it almost goes back to a barter economy, and then
yeah, that's right.
And then you don't know what's on the other side in this case, and then also you're not a customer, so you don't feel like you have rights because you didn't pay for something. So who is the customer? It's not obvious. So the whole psychology of the transaction becomes flawed, and you almost don't have any more rights anymore. That's what you don't like about free. Right?
Good statement. Well put.
And the internet popularized it, and Google made it more popular than ever with free Gmail, free internet, free YouTube, free all of this stuff. And we haven't really properly thought out the ramifications of that. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I also believe that these big companies can really launch all sorts of new projects and new businesses without any real commitment to whether they succeed or not. And capitalism thrives through a learning process. Economic growth is really learning. It's an increase of knowledge. That's what economic growth is about. And if you don't have any prices, you really miss that learning process. And so you become kind of a big sterile company like a government. And that's what I fear in Google, that they're launching self-driving cars and spaceships and live forever calico programs and not to mention all their searches and maps and everything else. But they don't have a real economic set of constraints from which they can learn by serving particular customers who pay them money. So I think that ultimately Google is hurt by its free strategy.
That's a fascinating way. You once said that you completely agree with Peter Thiel on the thesis that technology progress is not inevitable. It's the product of human creativity, which a lot of people would be surprised at. And you said if creativity didn't come as a surprise, we wouldn't need it, and socialism would work. Is this missed sometimes by people out there?
Yeah. Well, I think it is. Today, a lot of people in Washington actually imagine that we can't compete with the Chinese economy because the Chinese subsidize a lot of their companies, or the Chinese have top-down rules, and that Communist Party regulations that actually render them more potent competitors. The fact is that that's the big vulnerability of China. To the extent that the Communist Party really does interfere ever more deeply in their economy, they're the future of their enterprise is hurt. And today the biggest threat is the Communist Party is actually reaching down and forcing companies to fire their owner CEOs if they get uppity, if they seem to emerge as too important figures like Jack Ma, who the founder chief of Alibaba, one of the great companies in world history is Alibaba, which made a tremendous contribution to Chinese growth. And Jack Ma is still a pretty young man, and he now works for some UN agency because allegedly because communist apparatchiks forced Alibaba's board to kick him out. Right. And that's a really alarming development. And there's several other leading business figures who've been forced out of their companies by political interference. And I think it's a real danger to China.
Right. So you need that creativity and the capitalism.
Yeah.
The capitalism has to be there because you must be rewarded with monetary gain for great ideas.
Yeah.
So it can't be in a free system of Google. That will retard it, and the socialism will retard it, and the communism does because, like you said, those outliers, they get quieted.
Yeah.
So they won't get the innovation they really need.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that it's important, crucial to my understanding of capitalism, is that capitalism is not primarily an incentive system. It's not a scheme of carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments, by which good behavior or profitable behavior is rewarded and mistakes are punished. That whole model is a sort of mechanistic model of the economy. And I believe that capitalism is chiefly not an incentive system, but an information system. And that wealth is chiefly knowledge. And you can see this if you realize that the Neanderthal in his cave, as Thomas Sowell wrote decades ago, has all the resources, all the material resources that we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is not more resources, it's more knowledge. And that's what wealth really is. And growth is learning. And it's growth is the increase in knowledge. And the rules of learning are really defined by the scientific method. Ventures, business ventures, every business venture is the entrepreneurial test of an idea. And unless it can fail, it can't, unless it's falsifiable in terms of the scientific method, it can't succeed either. That's one of the problems with the Google strategy of depending entirely on these third parties who buy advertising. You have to be able to fail. When government tries to guarantee economic growth, it prohibits it because you can't guarantee an imaginative process of surprising creativity.
And then that idea can't stand on its own two legs, and you never know if it's real.
No.
And so, interesting, capitalism isn't about, like you said, carrots and sticks. It's not even about money. It's about information and the collection of great ideas. And that's what creates the wealth.
That's right.
But people miss that, and they see money in the capitalism.
Yeah.
But that's not correct.
No, that is not.
The invisible hand isn't about money. The invisible hand promotes a great idea.
Yeah. You know, this whole business should have failed a long time ago, this mode of argument. You can't really say that Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whatever need billions and billions of dollars to motivate them to go to the office and pursue the expansion of Google. That's just wrong on its surface. They can satisfy all their needs with radically less money than they supposedly command. The reason we need these people is because they know how to expand wealth. Money in capitalism doesn't go to people who spend it best, which is the demand side image. It goes to people who can expand it best. And when they expand it, it's usually illiquid. All sort of long-term projects that actually produce great value are illiquid. And this is, and as Bill Gates used to say, he is bound to the mast of Microsoft. Back in the years when Bill was really running Microsoft, if he'd started selling shares massively, the shares would have fallen in value faster than he could sell them. You know, this whole idea that somehow the wealth of the billionaires or whatever is comparable to sort of spending money gained by ordinary people in the economy is just a misconception. That wealth is all invested, and thus it's illiquid, chiefly illiquid. And thus it's, if you tax it away, what you do is you devalue it. You know, if you force people to sell their companies and their shares in some effort to equalize incomes, you devalue all the companies by that process, and it's the great delusion of redistribution.
And he's not motivated by making 100 billion anymore. That's not Jeff's motivation.
No, now he wants to stop climate change. I mean, what's really a disaster is when the charities of these big billionaires are really their efforts to appease political correctness are really the disease. I mean, Jeff Bezos now is giving $10 billion to stop climate change. And you just can be sure that money is going to be wasted. It's really not designed to achieve any business goal or any human goal. It's designed to pay off all people who are challenging Jeff Bezos as a monopolist or as a Me Too violator or as some other kind of offender. So $10 billion to climate change, as if there's any problem in every rich family in America virtually has a climate change program. And they're all damage the environment and create all sorts of foolish pursuits and corrupt all the universities and distract scientists from the real scientific method.
But he's doing it as a reaction to the fact that we won't let him go ahead and pursue his ultimate form of creativity and ideas and capitalism.
That's right. He's now being sued by the FTC. He's being harassed all over the place. He's being tweeted and twitted by President Trump.
And you think
Bezos is really in the crosshairs of the media everywhere, and he just wants to be liked again.
And you think we
10 billion bucks for climate change seems to be a formula for being liked.
And you think we should just leave them alone and let everybody get on with their capitalistic endeavors?
Yeah.
Okay, except for Google, we got to watch them.
Well, I mean, I think Google will fail if its business strategy is misconceived. And my book is not about attacking Google for doing nefarious things. It's criticizing a business strategy that I think will fail and that is bad for the U.S. economy, is being excelled dramatically by a whole set of Chinese companies, and which is provoking government in the United States and Europe to harass Google constantly and litigate against them and sue them. And so it's a dead end.
We definitely need to get you at the talks at Google and see what they say. And they're very open-minded there, so it could happen. I want to talk about blockchain because I think you believe this could be the solution, and it involves a lot of, individual ownership of what's going on in their lives and their spending. Before we get to that, just want to let people know that we have recorded a separate video called Internet Reboot that talks about your investment strategies based on a lot of these ideas we just talked about, including your call on 5G, which I do want to talk about. There's a link below, or londonreal.tv/reboot, and you have some incredible ideas and obviously a great history of predicting things that come true. Talk to me about the blockchain, because you've become this, blockchain guru now. You're in London to talk at
CoinGeek.
CoinGeek.
CoinGeek
you're meeting,
2020.
You're meeting with the man that you believe is the real Satoshi Nakamoto, who denies it. But you are right in there. You've met with Andreas Antonopoulos, who we've had on the show 3 times. Tell me about what you see in blockchain and what is currently happening.
Well, I think the blockchain is what is sometimes called a unity. It's a single technology that addresses a set of serious global crises. And the 2 most serious ones, I think, is the collapse of internet security. And when you can tell a paradigm has failed, when the more money you spend on it, the worse the results. And today, the internet security paradigm in 2019 generated some 8 billion breaches of personal data, 8 billion pieces of personal data were hacked. And 4 times the year before. I mean, it's just, and every year we spend 20% more on internet security, and every year there are more hacks. This is a broken paradigm. The other great hacking scandal in the world is the scandal of money. The biggest industry in the world is not food or transportation or housing or or medicine or whatever. The biggest industry in the world is currency trading. Every 3 years, the Bureau for International Settlements does a triennial review, its triennial survey. And in 2016, which was the last one until last month, a couple months ago, they estimated that currency trading was $5.1 trillion a day. That is 25 times all global GDP, roughly. It's roughly 75 times all global trade in goods and services. And the result of all this currency trading is, it seems to be more trade wars, more currency conflicts, more economic conflict and failure. And that's, and I've just discovered that the new triennial review of the Bureau of International Settlement shows that over the last 3 years, while the world economy didn't really thrive, there was some kind of recession. Trade stopped growing. During this period, currency trading increased 30% to $6.7 trillion every 24 hours. I mean, it's just an absurd sort of waste of computer power and waste of entrepreneurial skills, waste of bandwidth. And the reason I'm so excited about the blockchain is that it addresses both these problems at once. It's a unity. It addresses the problem of internet security. It's a new security layer for the internet where personal identities can be immutably anchored in this blockchain software structure. And it solves this other hacking problem where central banks hack world money, and in this carnival of floating currencies and currency trading.
This is central banks printing money, monetary policy easing,
and issuing debt madly, and
right.
and stealing from the future, and you know, it just that's central banks operations which don't even result in more trade. If it, you know, that should, if money is working, global money is working, you have more trade every year and less conflict, and the money is more reliable. It offers more dependable information to entrepreneurs. So there's less conflict, but because of this scandal of internet security, we can't even trust Huawei routers. This was the great Chinese telecom company. It was a private company, and that beat out all the state-owned enterprises in China and became the world's leading telecom equipment vendor. And now we're terrified that if Huawei routers, which are full of American and Israeli and Western chips and based on Western standards and incorporate Western software, that somehow these Huawei routers are going to be a Trojan horse that brings down the West. It's just, it's a fantasy.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but it's the result of this collapse of internet security, because with billions of hacks, you can't trust anything. And so all these nations are building walled gardens around their internets and trying to regulate them more, and they're going to extinguishing this great achievement of our era, and which is really internet technology. And so the blockchain offers a solution to internet security, and it also offers a solution to global money. This whole idea that money is a feature of sovereignty, a property of nation states, and is a just complete misconception. Money until 1971 was universal. It was based on gold. And in 1971 and really 67 before it, the US left the gold standard completely and cast money into this current chaos of trillions and trillions of dollars worth of currency trading every 24 hours. It's just bizarre phenomenon that has no utility. It enriches 11 or 12 big banks quite a lot. It's just a gigantic scandal of money. And the blockchain, Satoshi Nakamoto, probably Craig Wright, this Australian rogue, really invented blockchain probably, and it's pseudonymous. This Satoshi Nakamoto, people don't know quite who he is, but it seems at least Craig Wright was pretty central to this whole development.
Okay, and should we have stayed on the gold standard?
We should have stayed on the gold standard, but the gold standard would have been digitized by now. It would have evolved into new forms that would retain the measuring stick property that money has to have.
Okay, and what's stopping us from making this transition to blockchain? Because there's a lot of entities and governments resisting this, resisting that control.
Because governments have persuaded themselves that one of their greatest powers is just to print money. And if governments can print money, money really doesn't mean anything. I mean, money is just an expression of government willpower and extravagance and political pandering. And money no longer is an information tool that guides all economic behavior and the information theory of economics that I'm developing.
Right. And so how do we make this transition into this, using this blockchain layer around the internet to get this security and get us, you know, a real form of money? Because it seems like there's a bunch of bumps in the way.
Yep.
With also currently of understanding right now these volatile cryptocurrencies that we don't know how to use as money. They don't feel like money. They scare us. How do we make that transition?
I believe that this transition is underway, and all around the world, experiments are now being conducted with blockchain. And once blockchain is linked to some standard that resembles gold, so money all around the world is valued by the same physical constants that make it function as a metric rather than as a central bank model. It's, I think, that's the crucial thing. And Xi Jinping in China has just endorsed blockchain. He gave a long speech to his central committee of his Communist Party saying that blockchain was going to be a core technology for China. Facebook is trying to adopt blockchain. Google has various blockchain projects. JP Morgan Chase, all over the world, people are experimenting with blockchain. And once it gets established, once really superior money is launched, I believe more and more people are going to use it. People are already using Bitcoin for all its flaws. Whenever there's a real economic crisis in Greece or Zimbabwe or Venezuela, Bitcoins became a salvation for an economy where the money had been destroyed by government. And I believe that we're in the process now of evolving a new world economy around blockchain. And but this is the period which I always call in the diving board model of the economy, where you know, all the entrepreneurs, they go out to the end of the diving board and say they're going to do this and that, and they degree of difficulty 1,000 or whatever, and then they dive and disappear, and all the people around the swimming pool say, hey, that guy's never going to come up. This is the end of that project. But the fact is, this is when all the creativity really happens, during the phase when the money has been invested. There's been some, just in ERC20 tokens from Ethereum, which raised some $20 billion for thousands of crypto projects in the last few years. There's all sorts of creativity and invention going on. And I believe most of these are going to fail, and many of them, more than half of them, have already failed. But ultimately, someone's going to get it right. And maybe Satoshi will get it right again, who knows. But they do have to understand that money is a measuring stick. It's not a speculative asset. As long as they imagine that they're going to get rich by hodl, that's holding. Bitcoin it's called HODL. As long as people imagine that money can be a speculative asset where you get rich, they're going to fail. Money has to be a measuring stick, and you have to be able to issue as much of it as the economy needs. As what controls the quantity of money should be the number of projects that entrepreneurs are willing to commit themselves to and borrow money to pursue. And that's what limits the money supply, not some rule, as Milton Friedman proposed, of having a limited, rigid, mechanistic monetary system where all the adjustments come in the price of the money. Money has to reveal prices, not set prices.
Right. What if you'd told this to Ronald Reagan in 1982, or told this to your friend Henry Kissinger in 82, that in the future, some 50 years from now, there will be no money, there will be this thing called a blockchain, and central banks won't control it?
Well, I believe money is important, but central banks won't control it.
Okay.
Reagan pretty much understood this. Reagan was a gold standard advocate, and he understood. And a lot of people believe Volcker effectively targeted gold when he overcame inflation in the 1980s. Inflation, when Reagan assumed office, was 15–20% a year. Interest rates were spiking. People were predicting peak oil, peak population, peak food, that famine and plague was prophesied. And
people forget.
Reagan was remorselessly optimistic, and he was willing to accept Volcker's terrible recession of the early 1980s in order to overcome inflation and restore the soundness of money.
Right. And thanks to your book that he read, right, when he joined.
Yeah, he read Wealth and Poverty. You know, when I wrote Wealth and Poverty, I didn't understand money as well as I do today. But I've now written 6 or 7 more books on money and economics, and 15 more books overall.
Right. And you know a few things about money. Yeah. And so again, if people want to learn your calls on some of these monies, there's a free report we've recorded and that they can download below, LondonRoulette.tv/reboot. The things that you talked about in Wealth and Poverty, which Reagan went ahead and implemented, was this concept that lowering taxes and reducing the size of the government would promote the economy. I know that's probably a really simple way of saying that.
Well, I actually made a more aggressive statement than that. Everybody believed that.
Okay.
What I said was lowering tax rates, increase revenue, and allow you to expand the government if you want, if that's the best thing for you to do. You can't expand government by raising tax rates. Raising tax rates just inhibits the private sector and reduces economic growth and progress. So I said, lower tax rates yield more revenue. And the World Bank, a guy named Keith Marsden at the World Bank, did quite a good study that showed that taking all the economies of the world, the countries with low or declining tax rates, grew their governments 3 times as fast as governments with high or rising tax rates. And the reason the countries with low tax rates could increase their governments 3 times as fast, government spending, was that their private economies grew 6 times as fast. And this is the rule. This whole idea that that our problem is austerity, that we're spending too much, and if we just raise taxes to pay for our government spending, we'll balance of some budget or balance some ledger in heaven, and we'll prosper again, is just completely incorrect. That strategy is futile, and so even I think that most government programs, really most of them, have lots of bad effects and probably are net inflict net damage to the economy. So I mean, certainly retrenching government is a desirable thing to do, but that's true regardless of what the tax rates are. And what you want, these are 2 separate challenges. There's no relationship between government spending and tax rates. You raise tax rates in order to expand government, and government shrinks because your economy collapses and you're no longer capable of achieving your government program.
Why is that so hard for us humans to understand, that raising taxes or being austere is the complete wrong way to stimulate an economy? Why? Is it because we have this mentality that our mom and grandma said you better save? And
no, it's because I believe that it's a combination of envy. I mean, people want to tax the rich. I mean, this is what leftist parties constantly, they pretend that the rich are somehow avoiding taxes and they need to pay more in order to redistribute resources from the rich to the poor. It's all that redistributionist idea that was Karl Marx's great mistake at the time of the Industrial Revolution. That was our final human achievement, and from then on we just redistribute wealth. And today it's believed that all the wealth we need is in the coffers of Google and Facebook and Walmart and whatever, Alibaba, and that now we just need to redistribute the existing wealth, Amazon, Bezos's wealth.
Right.
And Bezos wants to anticipate these demands by
setting up the global warming fund, right?
Yeah, right.
But that's flawed because, like you said with Marx, he forgot the fact that we must continually innovate as a culture. We must learn new things, test ideas, like you said.
Yeah,
and capitalism gives us the chance to do that. So let it run is what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
let it run as it should.
Right. That's right. And the human race constantly faces big unexpected challenges. I mean, now the coronavirus is a threat.
Where capitalism could help there.
Sure, absolutely. I just came from Seattle a few days ago, where I met with Matt Schultz, who's one of the great biotech geniuses of our era. And he has 4 companies he started that address various opportunities in biotech, making biotech into an information science rather than a chemical science, and reprogramming human bodies to produce what they need to overcome any such perils as coronavirus and other, and this is, but this capitalism will solve these problems. Government can't do anything about it. The poor Chinese government is thrashing around trying to quarantine people, and maybe that will work for a while. But ultimately, if you're going to deal with viruses and plagues which continue to recur, you're going to have creative pharmaceutical industry that can address these problems, and biotech industry that can address these threats with ever more creative solutions.
Where a financial motive must prevail in order to get the most creativity.
Yeah, well, no, I don't like this, the financial motive. That's not the point.
Okay.
The point is that the people who generate wealth have to have further wealth to reinvest, to expand their ideas. We don't give entrepreneurs more money as a reward or to motivate them or as a carrot and stick.
We give it to them.
Entrepreneurs, the people who generate wealth, have to command the resources to expand it. Right. It takes constant reinvestment, constant pursuit of new ideas with outcomes that can't be predicted.
Right.
This is why government guarantees always fail, because
there's no consequences.
No consequences, but a learning process can't be guaranteed. The new ideas are unexpected. Creativity always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, planning would work, socialism would work.
Right.
And the enemy of surprise is a government guarantee. If the government tries to guarantee economic growth, it by definition thwarts it, because the guarantee will necessarily be based on the past and will not anticipate unexpected developments in which all future wealth depends.
And that's what China is doing.
China is trying to, well, China is doing lots of things.
Okay.
China is a great big country. The Communist Party is probably doing lots of bad things most of the time. But they also, ever since Deng Xiaoping, and the Chinese have been creating free zones. They've been promoting entrepreneurship. They've been expanding venture capital. They've been mimicking Silicon Valley. They've been Jiang Zemin, who was mayor of Shanghai, went and launched a lot of the free zone experiments in China, called the American NASDAQ and IPO system, initial public offerings, the crown jewel of American capitalism. And China has been creating stock markets and initial public offerings ever since. And now they have 3 times as many initial public offerings as we do. And they have many more business starts than we do. And they're educating millions more engineers than we are. And so at the same time that they're stifling freedom of speech and stifling political competition, they are promoting economic competition. And it's hard to tell how this is going to turn out, but it could be that the Communist Party tries to take over the entire economy and manage it and rule it, and will create another great catastrophe like the Mao era. where they tried to guarantee economic growth and progress, and cause famine and plague and failure.
Yeah. I want to just finish up with economics really quick. You know, Trump has famously lowered taxes and now driven, you know, the stock market to all-time highs, pursuing similar policies as Reagan in that sense. And first of all, does that surprise you that that has happened and that was that outcome?
Well, I have, I'm delighted that Trump lowered corporate tax rates. He's, you know, our tax system is still Leviathan. It's still incredibly complex. It still costs, I can't remember, billions and billions of dollars for compliance. It loses revenues left and right, even with Trump's reforms. I'm glad that Trump did reform corporate taxes. We had some of the highest in the world, and that was causing companies to leave the United States or not establish themselves here. So
should we abolish taxes, corporate taxes and personal income taxes?
We certainly could abolish corporate taxes and have flat rate personal tax rates. I think it would be fine, and we'd get a lot more revenues, and the government would have more resources to waste or possibly to invest in valuable ways.
Right.
We
used to not have a personal income tax.
But the idea
right?
that, but the stock market is another. You realize that the U.S. stock market is only half as big as it was 20 years ago. There's only half as many public companies, and that the number of IPOs has collapsed some 90%. That is initial public offerings. There are now a lot of big unicorn initial public offerings that people imagine mean that this is a great era for IPOs, but that's a deception. Small companies can't go public anymore, and it's really a tragedy. So there are serious issues still in the United States, and I think Trump has been a great president in many ways, but I don't agree with his trade policy. I don't agree with his China policy. I think there are a number of problems, and I think the constant vaunting the stock market as much of the money that supports these record prices comes from the companies themselves. It's sometimes 80% of the net new investment in many of these companies comes from the companies themselves.
Stock buybacks.
Yeah,
right.
Stock buybacks.
Right. And so it's not the best barometer of how everyone's doing.
It really isn't. And money, and there's a scandal of money. Money doesn't mean anything if it can be just printed by governments. That's why I believe that it's crucial to understand that money is essentially time. What remains scarce when everything else grows abundant? It's time. And money is what translates this ubiquitous economic scarcity that governs all our lives into the economy in a fungible way. So you can use this symbolic embodiment of time, which is money, to purchase goods and services and offer the signals, information signals of that govern economic growth and learning.
Will there be a more accurate way of tracking people's time in the future? And will government start using that to really track economies?
I think time prices. Two economists, Gail Pooley of Brigham Young in Hawaii, and Marion Tupy of St. Andrews in Scotland together are following up on the Nordhaus concept of true prices being time prices to restate almost all economic data and make it universal. Everywhere, the value of goods and services is measured by the number of hours you got to work to buy them. And that's the real price. When you run out of money, you're really running out of the time to earn the money to buy what you want. It's, time is the real scarce resource when everything else grows abundant. And when governments can print money, central banks can print money, but they can't print time. And so what they do, they end up stealing from the future. And we now have an overhang of some $250 trillion of global debt that's all a kind of doomsday pot that is got to be sustained by subsequent generations. And this is really the chief reason for the scandal money of this currency trading, is to allow central banks to steal from the future to pay off their the politicians and their constituents of today. And it's a rebellion against time. And I think that that's what the blockchain offers, a return to an immutable ground state for both world internet communications and electronic commerce, and a new ground state for world money, where realigning the economies with the reality of the passage of time.
I love this concept. Okay, it's powerful. All right, I want to talk about 5G technology and this new generation of Wi-Fi called Wi-Fi 6, which I haven't heard about. So want to get you to talk about that again if people want to learn about how you plan to advise investment in the 5G companies. We've recorded this thing called Internet Reboot. Link below, londonreal.tv/reboot. Tell me about 5G. We're paranoid in this country that Huawei is going to come in and take over our 5G networks. I think Boris just said they could come in. But what do you see in 5G, and what is this Wi-Fi 6? I've never heard of it.
Well, 5G is the establishment solution to the future of communications. It's all the big telecom companies really setting a new standard that perpetuates the dominance of these big telecoms of exclusive spectrum. And in the US, they have auctions that sell off spectrum, exclusive rights to specific bands of frequencies that all our communications devices, all our wireless communications devices use. And back when we were doing 2G and 3G and 4G or whatever, I used to predict that all the action would not occur in these auctioned exclusive bands. It would occur in the ISM bands, which are unlicensed bands. And unlicensed bands, where ISM stands for industrial, scientific, and medical. And the idea was that factory floors and hospitals and laboratories and other such uses couldn't apply to government for exclusive spectrum every time they wanted to do an experiment or use some frequency, that they needed unlicensed bands, and that they could, and I predicted all the action in technology would migrate to the unlicensed bands. And Wi-Fi emerged. And Wi-Fi isn't exactly industrial, scientific, or medical, but once people began depending on Wi-Fi, it expanded endlessly, and the various communications authorities did not limit it. And so sure enough, between 70 and 80% of all communications now is completed by Wi-Fi. And now I believe the big change in 5G with this new big standard is going to be a gigahertz. That is a billion. Gigahertz is a billion cycles a second, but this is spectrum is measured in hertz, and a whole big gigahertz of new spectrum is going to be assigned to the unlicensed bands. And this now there's only about 600 megahertz of spectrum used by the unlicensed bands. So this is more than a doubling of the unlicensed bands. And this comes at the same time that a new Wi-Fi standard is being launched called Wi-Fi 6, which vastly expands the flexibility and utility of and the number of carriers that each Wi-Fi router can provide. And so I believe that all the action in the next decade or next several years in communication is going to migrate to Wi-Fi 6. And you're going to have Wi-Fi 6 is going to be a lot more important and meaningful than our 5G. These hundreds of thousands, millions of antennas from Huawei that are going to be strewn around everywhere and are going to handle such high frequencies that they can't really penetrate walls. They aren't useful for mobile applications, many of these frequencies. So I think that 5G is overrated, like all big establishment projects, and that entrepreneurs will learn how to create cognitive radios that can survey all the frequencies out there and direct the communications to the unused spans of frequency in real time. And these are called cognitive radios or software-defined radios, which already work well on battlefields, and the Israelis are brilliant at it. And I believe that these cognitive radios, which generate the frequencies, are going to be the most important developments of the Wi-Fi 6 era.
Okay, that's fascinating. All right, and again, there's the report below on the link, LondonReal.tv/reboot, if people want to find out the exact pics in the 5G sector on Wi-Fi 6. That's fascinating. You know, we saw this in the internet boom in the 90s, because I was in New York City, where everybody was building out all of this fiber optic, and it was just massively built and massively overbuilt. And then I think we soon realized that we actually didn't need all this technology, and they started running all this internet stuff over very low bandwidth cable, and all of those companies kind of went out of business. Well, they had overspent on infrastructure. Is that something? Is that any kind of similarities between that and what you see happening with 5G?
Well, that fiber is the net. I mean, all the backhaul, all the kind of international, all the undersea, all long distance communications, all goes through fiber, and fiber is increasingly used in all these previously coax systems, which in the US are cable TV. And so fiber, the reason it was a scandal of money that brought down those 1,000 telecom companies that had went into debt in order to launch the fiber optic revolution, which I called the telecosm, and which really did transform our world economy. So I don't think we overlaid fiber. What happened is fiber is has huge capacity, immense capacity, and all the expenses are front-loaded, while the yield of it is enjoyed far into the future. And during the late 90s, the dollar rose in value some 60%, 70% against gold and 30% against all commodities. And so all countries, companies, entities that went deep into dollar debt in the late 90s essentially went broke. You had all the economies of Asia went broke. You know, the Asian financial crisis was a vast convulsion across all of Asia. And all of that stemmed from this huge increase in the value of the dollar, engineered by monetarist managers of central banks. We didn't have gold, and so central banks just made catastrophic mistakes. They thought the big threat in the late 90s was inflation, when in fact prices were plummeting massively with the internet revolution and all sorts of other inventions and advances. And all these companies that went into debt to lay the fiber foundations of the world economy in which we currently live went bust. But the Global Crossing laid fiber across all the oceans of the world, and we're still using their fiber investments, but Global Crossing went bankrupt, and so did hundreds of other similar companies, and as well as retailers that went into debt during that period. Target almost went bankrupt as a result of the same, and all of Asia. I mean, this was just a disastrous mistake, and which comes from having unmoored money that has no anchor in anything outside the system itself. It's a self-referential loop manipulated by central banks, and it can result in this kind of disaster. By comparison, the 200 years of British prosperity that were launched by the gold standard. For 200 years, the British government could issue consols with unlimited horizons at 3% interest rates. It's because gold really is an index of time, as I explain in Life After Google, my book on the future of the world economy.
Right. You once said that when it comes to global warming, it's a bad way of blaming Republicans for bad weather.
It's a good way for blaming Republicans for bad weather.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's just a... Do we want to go into the history of weather? I mean, the fact is that everything's dominated. All the global warming data merely reflects our escape from the little ice age of the 19th century and late 18th century. And we're now still recovering from this little ice age that had lots of bad effects. But temperatures now are not warmer than they were in the medieval climate optimum or in the Roman period or the Minoan period. There's nothing extraordinary about weather. Judged by time prices, the thesis is that we're now, because of the increasing emissions of CO2 that represent 0.04% of the atmosphere, that we're undergoing a period of extreme weather that's damaging agricultural production and prospects, and damaging the seas. And what time prices show, the true prices, how long people have to work to earn the money to buy any particular good or service, food or commodity, show that since 1980, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased by 22 to 25%. It's a significant increase in CO2. And did agricultural production drop during this period? Agricultural prices measured by time dropped 75%. Price of salmon dropped 80%, 85%. Workers have to expend far less time to earn the money to buy food and fish and nutrients and all the 50 key commodities that support human life. There's no evidence at all in time prices of any damage to agriculture by increases in CO2. All the evidence is that this small increase in CO2 has been extremely favorable for human life and global climate. But everybody always wants to complain about the weather. And now the left has brilliantly arrived at a way to blame conservatives for bad weather.
And what about rising sea levels?
And there's no rising sea level. The sea levels have been rising for centuries at exactly about the same pace they're rising today. There's no increased rate of sea level rise. And the idea that a few inches of sea level rise, 7 inches or something a century, that somehow human race can't deal with a rise in sea levels that is far smaller than tidal change every day. It's just one of those absurd claims that falls apart if you just contemplate it seriously.
Okay, which you're very good at doing. You've written speeches for Richard Nixon, Nelson Rockefeller. I mean, you've were mentored, I think, by Henry Kissinger. Obviously, Ronald Reagan quoted your work a lot. What's it like working with these powerful people?
I actually, my rule when I worked for politicians was to see them as little as possible. The crucial thing is that I was a speechwriter, and the key thing is they want the best speech they can get for a particular audience. And but if I talk to them before the speech, I have to pay excessive attention to what happens to be in their mind at that particular time. And ordinarily, the meeting with the speechwriter is not a central activity of that day. And I find it a waste of time to talk to politicians. I used to work at night. I'd go to the offices at night and write the speeches during the night where I wouldn't be interfered with, and then deliver the speech on the politician's desk the next morning and go back to my apartment and sleep. So I didn't, My worst job was working for Jacob Javits, who was a really brilliant guy who cared a lot about speeches and wanted to tell you exactly what to write. I had nothing to offer for Jacob Javits. But the best person was Nixon. Nixon would read word for word everything you wrote. I mean, he was just, he hired good speechwriters, and they really were terrific, from Pat Buchanan to Jeffrey Hart, and I wrote a lot of speeches, and he would read them word for word. And he did very well with his speeches. Nelson Rockefeller was dyslexic and not especially good at delivering speeches, particularly if you had to read them. So Nelson Rockefeller, you didn't want him to be reading speeches. You wanted him to be talking extemporaneously. He was very good at talking extemporaneously. He couldn't read a speech. Bob Dole was impossible, because he liked telling jokes and doing anecdotes, and I worked for Bob Dole, and he would sometimes laboriously read the first paragraph of the speech I'd written for him, and then he'd throw it away and launch onto a series of his very entertaining monologues. I had a lot of, I enjoyed my time with politicians, but I didn't spend much time with them.
And they'd call you up because you were the economist that knew what he was talking about and could help them communicate.
Well, I was, in the early years, I was just a writer.
Okay.
I've spent a whole year in Lansing, Michigan, writing a book for George Romney called The Mission and the Dream. And this was when Romney was running for president. And he ended up not running for president, and I ended up not getting paid for the book, which meant I pretty much had rights to everything in it. And I converted it into Wealth and Poverty 10 years later. That was why I could write Wealth and Poverty in time to come out before the Reagan administration. And the Reagan adopted Wealth and Poverty. It was a wonderful development for me.
Wow. You grew up in a dairy farm in Massachusetts.
I did.
But also, your father died, I think, when you were 3 in World War II.
Really, 2. He died when I was 2, but they didn't report his death until a year later. So it's between 2 and 3. Okay. I didn't see him in the last year of his life.
And yet, one of your godparents was one of the Rockefellers. So you had this
David Rockefeller.
David Rockefeller. So you had this strange existence where you're milking cows on one hand, and then you're hanging out on Fifth Avenue, or at these estates. Talk to me about that.
146
East 56?
48.
Is that Rockefeller Plaza, or that was our home address?
That's David's house.
David's house. Okay.
Yeah.
What's it like? How did that change you as a young man to grow up in these two realities?
Maybe it gave me a more independent mind. I mean, I definitely knew what life was like in real poverty. I mean, this dairy farming in the Berkshires was not a lucrative pursuit, but while I was growing up. And my stepfather, who was also my father's first cousin, had really difficult life and had no extra money at all. And then I would go off to the Rockefellers for various vacations in Seal Harbor in Maine, or in J.Y. Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And I spent a year living in his house in New York at 146 East 48. You know, I'm really losing anyway, I lived there for a year or more.
In New York City, when you were a teenager?
And I was, as a kid, I really was persuaded by David that I was a very special person who, because David admired my father, I think I can say as much as any person in the world. He thought my father was a genius, and he thought his loss in the Second World War was a tragedy. My father went to Germany with David after graduating from Harvard in 1936, and they saw Hitler speak and saw what was happening to Germany. And my father decided on the spot that war was inevitable with Nazi Germany. And he came back to the United States and began civilian flight training. And so he'd be prepared for what he thought would be a war that would be settled by air power. That was his insight, was that the war would be resolved by air power. And he was one of the first youngest members of the Council on Foreign Relations, and debated with people like Allen Dulles about what to do about Germany. And he was a really remarkable man. And David treated me as kind of, without much evidence that I could detect, as embodying all these, all the virtues of that he saw in my father. And that did really contribute to my life in a crucial way. And I like to think that my father might have liked a lot of my books. I saw a book that my father was writing before he died. He was writing an economics text, and I didn't see it until after I wrote Wealth and Poverty, but it was largely about intangible capital. And this is really an Austrian economic concept, which was central to all my books, and information theory of capitalism today really is based on intangible capital. Material resources are meaningless. They're all the atoms of the universe remain, and the question is how we deal with these atoms, and that's ideas. Intangible capital that determines the future of the economy. And my father saw that in his 20s, before he got into B-17 fighter bomber, a terrible plane that half of them never made it across the Atlantic, and he never made it across the Atlantic. He led a squadron of B-17s that, was the brilliant idea of the designers that you wouldn't need any fighter planes if you had all the fighter capacity in the bombers. And the mixture of a fighter and a bomber in contriving this device, they neglected to make it capable of flying across the Atlantic in a storm. And that cost my father and thousands of other pilots their lives in the Atlantic until in the B-17. Also gave me an idea of what a kludge is, a technology that's badly designed can cost lives.
Wow. And so that thing just couldn't make it across the ocean with bad weather. It would run out of fuel because it was heavy.
It just was cumbersome and flew low and was buffeted by weather and just couldn't make it. Half of them were lost, which is amazing, having a technology that half of them doesn't even perform the basic function of getting it to its place of application.
Yeah. Wow, it sounds like your dad was a bit of a futurist as well.
Yeah, he was. I really think he was a futurist.
And so you get kind of mentored by David Rockefeller. You end up getting to Harvard. You dropped out and went into the Marines for a couple of years. Was that just because you wanted to be like your dad, or?
I actually went into the Marines for 6 months and then 8 years of reserve duty. So I was in the Marines for 8 years technically, but I was only, I did all the Marine Corps training, and I liked that. That was really crucial to beat some sense into my head and some muscles in my body. And I'm really eternally grateful to the Marines for the training they gave me.
Because you're a bit of a
It was better than Harvard.
Okay, better than Harvard. The Marines were better than Harvard.
Yeah.
Should be a T-shirt. And before that, you're a bit of a bookworm or a bit of a geek or not physical and in your head?
Well, I was a runner and a track man.
Okay.
And, you know, my proudest running accomplishment was beating all the other runners in Camp Lejeune. I believe it was Camp Lejeune, in a 5K with a pack on my back. I ran that in 17 minutes something, which was just amazing. It was just, yeah, still today, I'm amazed at the time I did for that 5K, but I guess it was real because it beat hundreds of other Marines in training down in Camp Lejeune.
Yeah. What's a daily practice that you do every day? I think I know what it is, but you could share with people.
Well,
I mean, you're 80, right, George?
I'm 80, yeah.
80 years old, and yet you run every day.
I run today, and along the Thames, I ran about 6 miles. I like running up hills. In the winter, I like cross-country skiing, and I like cross-country skiing uphill, so I can then ski downhill on cross-country skis. When I go to Beaver Creek or Vail or one of those places, I ski uphill first and then ski down on my cross-country skis without paying. Don't tell anybody about this.
I mean, a lot of people couldn't do this at 60 or 70, let alone 80. I mean,
Yeah.
How do you do that every day?
Well, I've been doing it for 68 years or so, and I'm a runner, that's all. That's really essential part of my identity is being a long distance runner. I wasn't tremendously talented. I mean, I did do the 17 minutes with my pack 5K at Camp Lejeune, but my best marathon time was 3 hours flat, which isn't distinguished, and I ran a bunch of 4:30 miles, but never faster than that. And so, you know, I wasn't an extraordinary runner, but I kept at it, and I've been doing it all my life. And as I get older, I find my competition diminishes. So I've won about 100 races in the last several years for my age group.
Age group,
but,
wow.
But I beat the 70-year-olds.
4:30 mile, that's pretty good. A couple of questions about you. George, what was the best day of your life and the worst day, if you had to think about it?
Oh, boy. You know, it's really, I wrote Sexual Suicide, which is a celebration of marriage. So certainly my marriage to Nini was a glorious triumph, and all the children I've had 4 wonderful children who I love, and so family experiences really have been central to my life and my stability and ability to keep going. Okay. So those are the best times. The worst times, I think probably, you know, if I really had to think about it, I had a wonderful relationship with a cousin of mine who actually wrote speeches for Reagan. Okay. And he was just a wonderful person who I admired tremendously, and he was a brilliant writer, and I made him editor of the American Spectator during the time my newsletter business was really flourishing. I bought the American Spectator and made him editor of it. And I didn't realize at the time he had a terrible alcoholic problem. And it brought down the magazine, brought down my company. In the end, I did everything wrong. I just didn't know how to deal with a family member in trouble to whom I'd given responsibilities that would determine the future of my whole enterprise. And I love the guy still, and he's stopped drinking. He's a wonderful person, but that was the worst time of my life. Was because he blamed me for everything that happened, and so we really, you know, my closest friend and relative really became just terribly fraught and almost violent conflict, and that was an appalling experience. It told me, don't name your nepotism. Really is not a good idea.
Yeah, it's a good lesson. What scares you, George?
I'm scared that the United States really doesn't understand the world at all at the moment. That we really have a culture that's quite inimical to the ideas that made us great and triumphant in the world. And we're now facing a rising power in China. And in Washington, they still believe we're way ahead of China in technology. And I've spent months in the last year in China and visiting many companies in China. They are substantially ahead of us in most technologies.
Wow.
And to have this delusional belief that we can win a trade war with China and that we can continue to dominate the South China Seas with our giant naval vessels is just a real frightening prospect. And now we're decoupling from China. This is the fastest growing economy in the world. My time prices show that it's been growing a lot faster even than it's measured to have grown in monetary terms. And we imagine that we benefit from decoupling ourselves from this market. And what we do is we punish all the private companies in China that want to participate in our economy and help us expand and improve our living standards. I mean, Huawei, Alibaba, a company called Ping An that I discovered in China is an insurance company that is just incomparably ahead of all American insurance companies in its use of technology. You get in an automobile accident in China, if it's not too serious, it doesn't hurt you, and you get out and take a picture of the damage with your smartphone, and you explain the accident over the smartphone, and Ping An, a combination of artificial intelligence and other various innovations mean that within 10 minutes, your money is in your account, and you've been scheduled at the best available garage to fix your particular damage. The components have all been priced, and the estimates have all been completed. And I ran into a deer driving home from the airport, and it takes 6 weeks, and there are investigators and adjusters. I mean, just a ridiculous kind of imbroglio compared to this elegant and swift solution that Ping An. It involves face recognition. I want people to recognize my face. This whole idea that somehow face recognition is a bad technology is just ridiculous. How did that happen? We have this crazy exaggeration of Orwell, and Orwell was wrong. Orwell thought that telescreens were going to be a terrible instrument of government power. Instead, we have telescreens in in all our pockets, and we use it to, we gain access to it by face recognition often now. When I arrived at the best airport for face recognition that I've encountered is Heathrow. I came through there, and you just lay down your passport and they recognize your face and compare it to the passport and project you through. Face recognition is really valuable. It recognizes you. Privacy is not anonymity. Privacy is identity, and part of your identity is your face. And when we didn't have face recognition, government has to treat everybody as a terrorist. That's what happens in American airports mostly. And during the Second World War, we didn't have face recognition, so we had to incarcerate all the Japanese categorically in concentration camps. Yes, it's face recognition, like any other technology, can be used abusively by governments, but government abuses and dictatorial excesses are not caused by technology. And Mao was capable of killing people by the hundreds of millions without any advanced technology.
Right, right. It's really well said. I appreciate that. There's a documentary on Netflix called American Factory, just won an Oscar as well. Oh. And it's about a Japanese company moving into Dayton, Ohio, and rebooting a factory that closed down in the financial crisis. Yeah. And they put in a bunch of Chinese workers next to these American workers who used to be highly paid union workers at GM, but now are accepting salaries at probably a third of what they made.
A third.
And yeah, it's quite a lot lower. And it's just the merging of these two cultures, where the Chinese try to talk to the Americans, and the Chinese workers don't understand the Americans. They think they're lazy. The Americans think the Chinese are, I don't know, have the wrong value system. And it's this weird thing to watch. And it's just interesting to see how these cultures are so different, because the Chinese want to get it done no matter what. And they look at the Americans as being lazy and privileged and all these things. And to some extent, it's right.
It's pretty much right.
And these, I mean, the cushy jobs they used to have, that, like they said, we'll never get these back again, where they're making $55 an hour on a line. You know?
Yeah, maybe that's right. However, the time, Pooley and Tupi do this time price study based on the Farm Bureau estimate of the cost of a Thanksgiving dinner. And for a blue-collar worker in 1980, a Thanksgiving dinner used to take, for 10 people, used to take 36 hours of work. And today, for a blue-collar worker, it takes 9 minutes. And there's just a drastic improvement. No, I've got it, it's 36 minutes versus 9
minutes. Right, okay.
It's not 36, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was like, that's a big Thanksgiving meal.
Yeah.
So it's 1/4 of the time it takes them to have that same meal, because of the efficiencies that have been involved in creating that food and a lot of things.
Because of the technological revolution that's been spreading all around the world and has generated drastic reductions in the number of hours that typical workers have to work in order to buy the goods and services that sustain their lives. Okay. But if you assume that the worker in 1980 advances through the workforce like the vast majority did, and actually increased their incomes over the years, then that Thanksgiving dinner becomes still cheaper in hours of work. And you see that equality is improved. Puli and Tupi do this analysis of how long worker in Iowa had to spend to buy the wheat in the bread that sustains his life, essentially, and compares that to a rice farmer in China or in India, in Asia, actually in India. And they discovered that the wheat farmer in Iowa had actually increased his capabilities more than the rice farmer in absolute terms. But the wheat farmer began by only spending less than a day by generating the wheat to sustain his life, while the rice farmer spent 60 hours to generate the rice that sustained his life. So with the advance of the world economy, people in poor peasants who used to spend their whole lives just earning the food to keep them alive now have 40 hours a week to invent new products and launch new companies and enjoy new leisure pursuits. And while the wheat farmer only increased his available time by a few hours, I mean, it didn't. So there is a vast equalization of the world economy as a result of these advances that technology has caused, these learning curves all around the world that really identify economic growth.
Right. That's a powerful way of looking at the world, for sure. George, I always ask a few questions at the end. I'm going to ask you, if you could pick up a phone and call up the 20-year-old George Gilder, maybe you're at Harvard still or going off the Marines, I don't know. But if you could do that and give him some advice, based on everything you know now, what would you tell that young man?
Work hard. That you don't, contrary to what people always tell you, time working is good time. You shouldn't pursue good times in a sort of compulsive way. Pursuing pleasures actually yields pain. Pursuing goals through work really is edifying and ultimately enjoyable, and really the essence of human creativity in the image of his creator. And that, I think, is really what I would tell the young George, who was kind of a compulsive pursuer of pleasure despite his Marine Corps stint and other disciplines. I did work, but I didn't regret working too hard.
Okay, you like to socialize and party a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're saying over time you realized the real pleasure came in putting in hard work.
Yeah, and family. And family is really, I wrote, my first book was about politics that I wrote with my friend Bruce Chapman, and with whom I established the Discovery Institute, and he really worked in politics. He was head of the Census Bureau and head of policy planning under Reagan for a while. He's an ambassador to the UN and all kinds of things. But the books after, 4 of the books after that were about sex and family. I wrote Sexual Suicide, Naked Nomads, that showed that unmarried men were the cause of all the problems of the world. And
you still believe that?
yeah, sure. The barbarians.
Yeah.
The barbarians have to be tamed. And the way civilization tames the barbarians is getting them married. And you know, I'm an anti-feminist. I think feminism is a menace. And not that I don't like women achieving things. The women have always worked throughout history and have made tremendous contributions. But this idea that getting women out of the home into the workforce is a huge achievement is just a serious misconception. And the idea that natural male leadership is the result of some patriarchal conspiracy is just false. It's men do not dominate the computer science because they have some conspiratorial advantage, or men and women are different. And I did 4 books on that subject, and I don't regret any of them.
What do you make of
Men and Marriage is still in print and selling, and it's one of my best books.
I'm going to go read it. What do you make of the current, dialogue in the social sphere of all the opposite of what you just said? I think
it's really bad for the society. It's creating sexual suicide. It's people get married later, they divorce more, they have fewer children, they lose their links to the future. I think the man's tie to the future passes through the womb of a woman. And these links are being broken and twisted and subverted by a culture that exalts some false ideal of equality.
Yeah, I think you might have some good points there. Second part of that question, best advice you ever received could have come from David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, someone else as a writer, or just your father.
Well,
your mother,
David taught me about work. I mean, David, here was a man who epitomized money. I mean, he was head of Chase Manhattan Bank, and he was one of the richest men in the world, the richest family in the world for a long time. And he worked harder than anybody else I ever saw. He worked late into the night. He worked up early in the morning. He was a compulsive worker. And this told me that what was important wasn't money as an incentive. What was important was goals and aspirations and ideals and moral disciplines.
Yeah, powerful lessons. Last question to that 20-year-old that's out there watching us or listening to us right now. What advice do you have to them? If they've consumed a bunch of the ideas in this book and they've listened to us today, what's that one thing they should go do to take action and not let this just pass and things wash over them?
Well, I think they shouldn't exaggerate the value of credentials and qualifications and educational rewards. The real learning process behind capitalism is personal, and it often entails defying what all the experts tell you. All the great entrepreneurial stories are about people who really produce a surprising and unexpected advance because they defy what all the established powers have told them before. And when everybody in the world is lining up to applaud Greta Thunberg for declaring that the world's coming to an end in 12 years because of bad weather, it'd be wise to scrutinize the assumptions of this. When the richest man in the world is just about to waste $10 billion on changing the weather, you can really see a mania at large. And people should not imagine that or be browbeaten by people saying 97% of scientists have a consensus that the world's coming to an end in 10 years, or whatever it is, 12 years, I think Greta gives us. You know, this is just hokum. And, but many students now in American universities are accepting the hokum. They believe their lives are going to be worse than their parents. They believe that that there's some kind of doom hovering ahead, and if they all do believe this, they're probably right. I mean, if a whole generation of young people get demoralized and spend all their time trying to stop things rather than start them, as the colleges teach them. I mean, America is the world's leading country at stopping things with lawyers, and I think that that they should be contrarian. Okay. You don't do what everybody else is doing. Do what you see that's unique.
And that's how they can add to this world. It's really well said. Yeah, all the great entrepreneurs in this world did it their way, didn't they? Yeah. And that's what we need, that creativity, which is capitalism, without the insurance policy, right? No guarantees. It has to stand on its own. You have to go do it out there. It has to be risky. And then that wealth gets rewarded to who did it, so they can invest in these long-term liquid investments that take us to the next level.
Illiquid investments.
Illiquid, yeah, exactly. George, real pleasure sitting down with you. Love all the stuff in this book. People should go out and get a copy of this thing. I'm guessing Amazon, etc., is the place to get this. Life After Google. I also appreciate the video we recorded, which is the Internet Reboot, that has free download. They can get all of your various investment ideas, including 5G, a bunch of the technologies we talked about, and a bunch of other things. So they can go there. There's a link below, or they can go to londonreal.tv/reboot. You're going to have to come back and see us again in the future, because there's a bunch of things we didn't even cover. But thanks so much for your wisdom. Yes, some of your ideas I'm barely getting a handle on right now, because they're so grand and so contrarian and quite revolutionary. And obviously you think a lot about this stuff, and I really appreciate that. So
thank you so much.
All the best, George. Thanks so much.